Radio TV Phono Nut here, and today we have a Hi-Phonic model PO555 5-tube super heterodyne bed radio, General International Corporation, New York, Tokyo, Seattle, made in Japan. And yeah, this is another one of those $10, maybe less, little cheap 5-tube Japanese radios from the 60s. The model number would have probably been more accurate had it been POS-555. And this is what we have here. Even though this radio is still in the box that it came in, I can tell that it has been used. It's just one of those situations, I guess, where the owner kept the original box, and whenever it either stopped working or they decided to no longer use it, they just stuck it back in the box and put it away somewhere. And here we go, Hi-Phonic. This style of radio was sold under about 1 million different brand names and offered in many different case colors and made throughout the 60s. It might have even carried over into the early 70s. I've heard that they did, but I don't know. This one here looks like an older one that uses screws to hold the faceplate on instead of those little plastic pins. There's the back of it. And do we have a schematic on the bottom? Yes, we do. Looks like our rubber grommet has disintegrated, but that's okay. We can come up with one of those. Let's get it down to the workbench and see if we can make it play. Now, these radios are not the easiest to work on. They were made very cheaply. They were probably your first generation of disposable radios, these and the little pocket transistor radios, but usually most people didn't even bother to have these repaired other than maybe a tube replacement. They were so cheap that when they quit working, most people just tossed them in the trash. Okay, we have it apart, and unfortunately this is one of the earlier ones that didn't have the metal threaded inserts down in the speaker mounting holes. They screwed the speaker mounting screws directly into the plastic. One of them was broken off completely before I got it, and the screw was nowhere to be found, and the other one is almost broken off, so we're going to have to come up with some inventive way to mount the speaker, possibly a hot glue gun. That'll be about as substantial as the way they had it. Okay, here's the chassis, and this is an older one because it has more paper capacitors in it than a ceramic disc. The later ones had a mix of paper and ceramic disc ones, and the very last ones were all ceramic disc. And I think I'm going to take the across the line firecracker out and fire this up and see what it does, and then we'll go from there. This is one I'm tempted just to do the minimum amount to, just to get it to play, because, you know, really people that buy these radios, they don't buy them for their fine hi-fi quality, they buy them for decoration. And I can remember 25 years ago, I could get these at swap meets for $5 or less, and now they seem to be going for a lot more than that, especially if they play, or especially if the cabinet's in nice cosmetic shape, and if it's in a color other than black or white. If it's turquoise or blue or pink or one of those colors, you can just about forget getting it for a reasonable price. Well, I guess it all depends on what your definition of reasonable is, but me personally, I'm not going to pay $50 or $60 for one of these plus shipping. If I can find them cheap, then I'll pick them up, but I'm not paying some outrageous price. Alright, I'm hearing a little hum from the speaker, a little static when I turn the volume control. And what do you know, it plays. Volume control needs cleaning in the worst kind of way, so let's do that. Alright, we have our control cleaner. And we just run it back and forth a bunch of times and hope it doesn't make it worse, because these little cheap volume controls in these Japanese radios are not all that great. And sometimes I've cleaned them and it made it worse than it was to begin with. Well, I can tell you this radio seems to be a better performer than some of the later ones. We're picking up the little weak black gospel station. It's about 35 miles away. And this across-the-line capacitor is very leaky, as you can see by the glowing neon bulb on my tester. This is the capacitor that's, well, the reason they have it across the line is for interference suppression on the AC power line. And when these become very leaky or short, they literally explode and send shrapnel everywhere. And that's the reason I usually just take them out of circuit for testing before I even plug them in, because just about every one of these that I've seen is blowed apart. Okay, this capacitor here is our coupling capacitor. It couples the plate of the first audio tube to the control grid of the output tube. And if this capacitor leaks, which I feel reasonably sure that it is electrically leaky, it acts more like a resistor than a capacitor, and it passes a DC voltage to the control grid of the audio output tube, which, even though the radio plays, it will eventually cremate the audio output tube and possibly the audio output transformer. And usually, in extreme cases, the audio will be distorted. This capacitor here is our plate bypass capacitor. It connects between the B plus and the plate of the audio output tube. It sort of helps shape the tonal qualities of this radio, lack thereof. But more importantly, it prevents arcing and oscillation from taking place within inside of the audio output tube. And if this capacitor shorts, it'll kill your audio and can possibly kill your, well, in this case, it wouldn't kill the audio output transformer because it's wired directly across the primary, but if it shorted, it would definitely kill your audio and would put some undue strain on the power supply. Okay, I have those two capacitors replaced, the plate bypass and the audio coupling capacitor. And these sets are not the easiest to work on because of their cheap construction quality. Oftentimes they just lay three leads on a tube socket terminal and just drop some solder on it instead of making a mechanical connection. So when you try to remove one part, they all come loose, and then whenever you clean off the solder from the tube socket pin, the little hole in the pin is not big enough to run all three things back through, so it's just a pain in the butt. And then the wires, instead of having four individual wires running from point A, B, C, D, etc., they'll run one piece of wire from point A to point B to point C to point D, and everywhere they need to make a connection, they'll just melt the wire insulation and solder it in place. I guess that's probably a reason a lot of the old-timers refer to these things as quote-unquote Jap shit. Because in some respects, that's a lot of what this is. It's just cheap crap that wasn't meant to be serviced. Okay, we have one more paper cap to change, this chassis isolation capacitor, and look how classy this is. To make the connection to the chassis, they just soldered it to one of the tube socket retainer rivets. That's a first. I don't think I've ever seen that before. And this is one of the few condensers that's still readable. And all of these are rated TV 1000 volt DC, 0.02 microfarad, Sankyo Limited, made in Japan. Somewhere around here I've got a Sankyo branded cassette deck from the 70s. Although I don't think I've ever seen their name on a condenser before, but paper tubular condenser. And as it happens, I'm waiting on the mailman or mail lady, whoever she is, or whoever she or he or it or whatever is, to bring me another one of these Japanese radios that I got cheap. and it never fails. The day I'm expecting a package, that's the day they're real late showing up. When all they have is junk mail and bills of stuff I don't want, they're always there by 12:30 with that. And I think the reason that is that, from what I'm told, that when somebody calls in and doesn't show up for work for whatever reason, somebody else runs dual routes. Back in the day, they just call in somebody else to come run that route, but they don't do that anymore. That C guy, as my friend likes to call him, known as a consultant. You know, he started out with radio stations, and once he ruined the radio industry, he made his way to Walmart and then the post office, and it's like my friend said, he's always there, but you'll never spot him. But yeah, he came in and told the post office now this is my friend telling me this now. He came in and told the post office, no, you don't need to hire extra people to run routes. You need to fire as many people as possible, and if somebody calls in, you just make one person run 2 routes, and so what if somebody's real late getting their mail? We don't care. Well, it finally showed up at 4 p.m. Sounds like it's rattling around in there. Let's open it up and see if it survived in one piece. I can already tell it's not packed well, because if it was, we wouldn't hear that. I see we have these packing peanuts placed sparsely in the box. I got a method I use to remove contents from boxes packed like this. Hold all the 4 flaps up and then kind of gently lift the contents out while wiggling them, and not as many packing peanuts will fly everywhere, but to do that I need both hands, so hold on a sec. Well, here it is, but no tuning knob. Otherwise it seems intact. Alright, let me feel around in the box and see if the tuning knob is somewhere. And here's a power cord. Alright, I'm feeling something. This must be it. Yep, that's the tuning knob. Good. Okay, we have this little chip of plastic missing here where one of the chassis mounts was. I'll have to go look at the pictures and see if it was like that. It may have been, I don't remember. If it wasn't, maybe the piece will be floating around in the box, and if it is, we'll just epoxy it back on there. That won't be no huge problem. I see looks like somebody added an external antenna connector on here, but we'll deal with this a little bit later. Let's get back to the other radio. All right, in order to mount this other terminal here, I'm not going to solder it to the tube socket rivet like they did. I'm just going to solder it directly to the chassis. I've already sanded off a spot there, and we'll just use our soldering iron and get it good and hot and make a good connection, and that'll be that. Well, that was something interesting I should have got on camera. Plugged it in, turned it on, no current draw, like an open tube filament. And then I start wiggling tubes, and something popped and fire shot from somewhere. Sounding like a carbonized tube socket. Now, wouldn't that just be great after I've done all this? Well, now we're back on and getting whisper reception on 1390 with the volume turned all the way up. So now we got to find out what blew up or what happened here. Well, now I'm reading across the ohm meter and getting infinite resistance, or reading across the power plug with my ohm meter. So that tells me we have an open off-on switch or an open tube filament. And if I had to make a wild guess, I bet it was the rectifier tube that blew. Yep, that's what happened. It popped the filament tap. So let me take my ohm meter and check from the cathode to ground and see if I can find any shorts. The only thing I can possibly see that could have happened is our pin 6 right here. And you can see how wiggly this is, and it was wiggly with the tube in. Although it looks like the wire insulation is stopping it, it's very possible this could have shorted to this, our cathode, and caused a blow up. But let me take my meter and check from cathode to ground and make sure there's no short. Okay, I'm not detecting any shorts from B plus to ground, and it could have been just this rectifier tube was ready to short and blow up, and when I tapped it, that's when the sparks flew, or the bright flash and the pop. When I rattle this, when I shake this, I can hear stuff rattling in it, so I think we're going to go find another 35W4 and see what happens. Alright, here's another one. Philco Cool Chassis TV. That seemed to be on all of the Philco tubes from the early to mid-60s. That's something they really pushed. And I don't think they meant a TV that was not connected to one side of the AC line. They meant a chassis that was designed to supposedly run cooler than the competition. Okay, before we install this and turn it on, I'm going to address this looseness here, and I think the way we're going to do that is just take this resistor out and either shorten its leads or put one of our more modern resistors between those two pins, and then it won't be so apt to get touchy-feely with something it's not supposed to, although I don't think that's what really happened. I think the other rectifier tube just shorted, and that was that. Alright, I'm still not reading anything across the AC power plug. Check the switch and it's good, so let's check the other tube filaments and see if any of them are open. That's what it about would have to be. Well, unfortunately, it seems I've selected a tube that was also a dud. This one also has an open filament, so this Philco Cool Chassis TV labeled tube isn't so cool right now. Now let me go try to find another one. Alright, I see the problem right here. This filament lead that goes back to the 12AV6 is not even soldered. And that's not anything I messed with. That was a factory boo-boo, which is not a surprise for these cheap little radios. You might recall we worked on one a while back that had a connection that was never even soldered from the factory. Excellent. Now we have continuity across the power plug, which indicates a complete circuit across the filament string.
A major, well-known hospital, and I would like to branch out a little bit, but I got diagnosed years ago with ADD. And
no sparks this time, thank goodness. Okay, I forgot to mention a little while ago, forget about the short bus. What I did, they wouldn't even let me on a bus of any kind, but yeah, checking the 35W4s, the reason I was reading open filaments on all of them is because I was checking the wrong pins. However, I did test the Matsushita original tube, and emission-wise, it tests good, but it has excessive gas. And when you plug the tube into the tube tester, the filament gets extremely bright for a second, which is something the other filaments in the other two tubes don't do. So I really don't trust that Matsushita tube to put it back in the radio, so we're just going to leave things as they are. Alright, we're getting WSM, so that's a good thing. Another couple of things I did to kind of improve the sound of this a bit is both the plate bypass cap for the audio output tube and the coupling cap for the audio output tube were upgraded from 0.005 microfarad up to 0.01 microfarad. That increasing the plate bypass cap will kind of cut some of that high frequency shrill, and increasing the coupling cap may allow a tiny bit more bass to come through, but of course you're not going to get much bass anyway out of a cheapo 3-inch speaker, so it's just the way it goes. Okay, as far as this filter condenser, most of what's in these sets is a dual 40. This one, the label, the print is turned where I really can't see it, and it looks kind of smudged. Value-wise, it checks 27 on one section and 38 on the other, so if it is a dual 40, one section's a bit weak there, so just to be on the safe side, I might go ahead and just change this, even though these Japanese electrolytics in these cheap little radios actually hold up surprisingly well. Okay, one section of this capacitor is showing excessive leakage on the old school capacitor tester when we tested it rated working voltage. So I suppose we'll go ahead and get rid of this and put a couple of new electrolytics in here. Okay, after doing some pondering and thinking about how to install the new filter capacitors, you can see what I've done here. I've installed two terminal strips on the underside of the chassis. This lug and this lug is going to be my ground lugs. This will be my input filter. This is our new 1K ohm resistor. The only reason I replaced the original because it was physically too big to fit in the space here. This is a 2-watt resistor, just a modern day small value, small physical size I should say. This will be our second filter capacitor. So we'll put our second filter capacitor on this terminal strip and our first one here, and hopefully there'll be enough room to put them under here. If not, I'll just have to put them on the top side and run the leads down through the hole here where the old can capacitor was. And we have two brand new Nichicon brand 105 degree 33 microfarad at 250 volts, and they should fit under the chassis just fine. Okay, I think we about had the filter capacitors installed, and you can see how I did it. I did it as neatly as possible considering the space I had to work with. A couple of the original leads I had to replace with longer leads in order to connect things up, and this green bypass capacitor on the 12AV6, I had to extend its lead slightly. But as you can see, we have everything in place, and it's under the chassis like I'd rather it be, so the capacitors won't get baked from heat from the tubes. And I'm going to go over this one more time, make sure there's nothing touching that ain't supposed to be touching and that kind of stuff, and then we'll connect our speaker and see what happens. See, the key to making a neat repair is, number one, having all the things you need on hand. And I really like these terminal strips. I try to keep a variety of them on hand. I just wish they didn't cost so much. I need to find a cheaper place besides Antique Electronics Supply to order them from. But these terminal strips will help you make a neat repair, and having hookup wire and heat shrink tubing and that sort of thing also helps. But the main thing that helps is to don't jump off into something. Use your head, evaluate the situation, and then plan it out. How are you going to make it look as neat as possible? Just don't go jump off into it and end up having a mess. Just like I said, use your head, plan things out, and have the proper materials on hand, and you should be able to make neat looking repairs yourself. Now, I'm not going to say this is the neatest looking repair ever made, but it's a heck of a lot better than a lot of what I've seen over the years. Alright, it's working.
You know how we know, Lauren?
Friends, I received a very interesting phone call from one of you today.
It sounds like you're giving up.
I'm not sure what he was hearing, but let me just say...
Request your song. 601-482-0910. We're Praise 95.9 FM, 910 AM.
How great is...
Oh, my God.
Alright, these things were never a hot DX machine, but this one is pulling in some distant stations at night. There's WSM.
Traffic lawyers. Everybody else, like you, think they can afford term life.
In case I forgot to mention, I looked at the pictures of that other eBay radio, and it was indeed chipped out at that chassis mounting area there, so no problems there. See, I'll admit when I'm the one that makes the boo-boo, but don't do like the guy did with the record player and try to tell me that the damage I pointed out to him was shown in the description when it clearly wasn't. All he was doing was making himself look like a bigger crook than he really is.
Reach out
And here we are back together. I found a couple of screws that I could very carefully penetrate the plastic without it breaking to hold the speaker in. So that ought to take care of it.
Angry or depressed most of the time. If you feel neglected or unloved,